Daniel Joseph Berrigan, S.J., was an American Jesuit priest, anti-war activist, and poet. Like many others during the 1960s, Berrigan's active protest against the Vietnam War earned him both scorn and admiration, but it was his participation in the Catonsville Nine that made him famous. It also landed him on the FBI's Most Wanted list on the cover of Time magazine, and in prison. His own particular form of militancy and radical spirituality in the service of social and political justice was significant enough at the time to shape the tactics of resistance to the Vietnam War in the United States. For the rest of his life, Berrigan remained one of the U.S.'s leading anti-war activists. In 1980, he founded the Plowshares Movement, an anti-nuclear protest group that put him back into the national spotlight. He was also an award-winning and prolific author of some 50 books, a teacher, and a university educator. Early life. Berrigan was born in Virginia, Minnesota, the son of Frieda Berrigan, who was of German descent, and Thomas Berrigan, a second-generation Irish Catholic and active trade union member. He was the fifth of 6 sons. His brother, fellow peace activist Philip Berrigan, was the youngest. At age 5, Berrigan's family moved to Syracuse, New York. In 1946, Berrigan earned a bachelor's degree from St. Andrew-on-Hudson, a Jesuit seminary in Hyde Park, New York. In 1952, he received a master's degree from Woodstock College in Baltimore, Maryland. Berrigan was devoted to the Catholic Church throughout his youth. He joined the Jesuits directly out of high school in 1939 and was ordained to the priesthood in 1952. Career. Berrigan taught at St. Peter's Preparatory School in Jersey City from 1946 to 1949. In 1954, Berrigan was assigned to teach theology at the Jesuit Brooklyn Preparatory School. In 1957 he was appointed professor of New Testament Studies at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York. The same year, he won the Lamont Prize for his book of poems, Time Without Number. He developed a reputation as a religious radical, working actively against poverty and on changing the relationship between priests and lay people. While at Lemoyne, he founded its International House. While on a sabbatical from Lemoyne in 1963, Berrigan traveled to Paris and met French Jesuits who criticized the social and political conditions in Indochina. Taking inspiration from this, he and his brother Philip founded the Catholic Peace Fellowship, a group which organized protests against the war in Vietnam. From 1966 to 1970, Berrigan was the assistant director of the Cornell University United Religious Work, the umbrella organization for all religious groups on campus, including the Cornell Newman Club, eventually becoming the group's pastor. Berrigan at one time or another held faculty positions or ran programs at Union Seminary, Loyola University in New Orleans, Columbia, Cornell, and Yale. His longest tenure was at Fordham, where he even served as the poet-in-residence for a brief time. Berrigan appeared briefly in the 1986 Warner Brothers film The Mission, playing a Jesuit priest. He also served as a consultant on the film Protests Against the Vietnam War. Berrigan, his brother and Josephite priest Philip Berrigan, and Trappist monk Thomas Merton founded an interfaith coalition against the Vietnam War, and wrote letters to major newspapers arguing for an end to the war. In 1967, Berrigan witnessed the public outcry that followed from the arrest of his brother Philip for pouring blood on draft records as part of the Baltimore 4. Philip was sentenced to 6 years in prison for defacing government property. The fallout he had to endure from these many interventions, including his support for prisoners of war and, in 1968, seeing firsthand the conditions on the ground in Vietnam, further radicalized Berrigan, or at least strengthened his determination to resist American military imperialism. Berrigan traveled to Hanoi with Hudson during the Tet Offensive in January 1968 to receive 3 American airmen, the first American pilots released by the North Vietnamese since the U.S. bombing of that nation had begun. In 1968, he signed the Writers and Editors War Tax Protest Pledge, vowing to refuse to make tax payments in protest to the Vietnam War. In the same year, he was interviewed in the anti-Vietnam War documentary film In the Year of the Pig, and later that year became involved in radical non-violent protest. Catonsville Nine. Daniel Berrigan and his brother Philip, along with 7 other Catholic protesters, used homemade napalm to destroy 378 draft files in the parking lot of the Catonsville, Maryland, Draft Board on May 17, 1968. This group, which came to be known as the Catonsville Nine, issued a statement after the incident. "We confront the Roman Catholic Church, other Christian bodies, and the synagogues of America with the silence and cowardice in the face of our country's crimes. We are convinced that the religious bureaucracy in this country is racist, is an accomplice in this war, and is hostile to the poor." Berrigan was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but went into hiding with the help of fellow radicals prior to imprisonment. While on the run, Berrigan was interviewed for Lee Lockwood's documentary The Holy Outlaw. The FBI apprehended him at the home of William Stringfellow and sent him to prison. He was released in 1972. In retrospect, the trial of the Catonsville Nine was significant because it altered resistance to the Vietnam War, moving activists from street protests to repeated acts of civil disobedience, including the burning of draft cards. As the New York Times noted in its obituary, Berrigan's actions helped shape the tactics of opposition to the Vietnam War. Plowshares movement. On September 9, 1980, Berrigan, his brother Philip, and 6 others began the Plowshares movement. They trespassed onto the General Electric nuclear missile facility in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, where they damaged nuclear warhead nose cones and poured blood onto documents and files. They were arrested and charged with over 10 different felony and misdemeanor counts. On April 10, 1990, after 10 years of appeals, Berrigan's group was re-sentenced and paroled for up to 23.5 months in consideration of time already served in prison. The legal battle was recreated in Emile d'Antonio's 1982 film In the King of Prussia, which starred Martin Sheen and featured appearances by the Plowshares Haters themselves. Other activism. Although much of his later work was devoted to assisting AIDS patients in New York City, Berrigan still held to his activist roots throughout his life. He maintained his opposition to American interventions abroad, from Central America in the 1980s through the Gulf War in 1991, the Kosovo War, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, and the 2003 invasion of Iraq. He was also an anti-abortion activist and opponent of capital punishment, a contributing editor of Sojourners, and a supporter of the Occupy movement. AIDS activism. In media, Dar Williams's song "I Had No Right" from her album The Green World is about Berrigan and his trial. January 25, 1971, featured on the cover of Time magazine along with his brother Philip. Adrienne Rich's poem The Burning of Paper Instead of Children makes numerous references to the Catonsville Nine and includes an epigraph from Daniel Berrigan during the trial. Paul Simon's song "Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard" refers to Berrigan as the radical priest. Lynn Sax's documentary film investigation of a flame is about the Berrigan brothers and the Catonsville Nine. Berrigan was interviewed about his life and activism for Kisseloff, Jeff. Generation on Fire, Voices of Protest from the 1960s, and Oral History. University Press of Kentucky. ISBN 0813124166. Berrigan appeared briefly in the 1986 Roland Joffe film The Mission, which starred Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. The character of Father Corrigan in the novel Let the Great World Spin was inspired by the life of Berrigan. Berrigan was interviewed for a television documentary called The Holy Outlaw by National Educational Television ed. September 1970. The Berrigan brothers were referenced in the novel The Man Without a Shadow pp. 140–141. Daniel and Philip Berrigan were noted among other social justice activists on a section on fasting for peace and justice, exploring a great spiritual practice, Fasting, by Carol Garibaldi Rogers p. 155. Death. In 2016, Berrigan died in the Bronx, New York City, at Murray Weigel Hall, the Jesuit infirmary at Fordham University. For many years, since 1975, he had lived on the Upper West Side at the West Side Jesuit Community. Awards and recognition. 1956, Lamont Poetry Selection. 1974, War Resisters League Peace Award. 1974, Gandhi Peace Award. 1988, Thomas Merton Award. 1989, Pax Christi USA Pope Paul VI Teacher of Peace Award. 1992, the Peace Abbey Foundation Courage of Conscience Award. 1993, Pacem in Terris Award. 2008, Honorary Degree from the College of Worcester. Selected publications. Daniel Berrigan was the author or co-author of more than 50 books. Time Without Number. New York. Macmillan. 1957. OCLC 781490. Winner of the Lamont Poetry Prize. Love, Love at the End, Parables, Prayers, and Meditations. New York. Macmillan. 1968. ISBN 9780020837503. OCLC 5,692,967. Trial Poems, October 7, 1968. Chicago, Thomas More Association, 1969. OCLC 921,848,244. Coles, Robert. The Geography of Faith. Conversations between Daniel Berrigan, When Underground, and Robert Coles. Boston, Beacon Press. ISBN 9780807005385. OCLC 239,919. America is Hard to Find. Garden City, N.Y. Doubleday. 1972. ISBN 9780385003278. OCLC 427,586. Berrigan, Philip. Prison Poems. Greensboro, N.C. Unicorn Press. ISBN 9780877750499. OCLC 726,986. Lockwood, Lee. Daniel Berrigan. Absurd Convictions, Modest Hopes, Conversations After Prison with Lee Lockwood. New York, Vintage Books. ISBN 9780394719122. OCLC 851,142,578, To Dwell in Peace, an Autobiography. Eugene, Oregon, WIPF and AMP, Stock, 1987. ISBN 978-1-55-635473-1. OCLC 307,596,569. Dear John and the Risen Bread. Selected Poems, 1957–1997. New York, Fordham University Press. ISBN 978-082-321-821-9. OCLC 38,519,749. Amari, Adriana Zinn, Howard. Prayer for the Morning Headlines on the Sun City of Life and Death. Baltimore, Maryland, Apprentice House. ISBN 978-1-93-407-4169. OCLC 123,350,245. The Trouble with Our State. Format equals requires. URL equals. New York, New York, Yellow Bike Press. 2007. OCLC 275,175,135.